Okay, so we are working on the Peter Pan notebook sample. To start this, you will need your front bodice and a back bodice and some paper. I already have mine cut out. And in figure 1, it says to place the front pattern touching the neckline and overlapping the shoulder tip by 4 inches. Okay, great. So I have my front here and I'm taking my back and I'm matching them up at the neckline so the neckline tips will touch, but then they want our shoulder to overlap 4 inches, but since we are on the half scale, we will have it overlap 2 inches, half of 4. So let's see here. Oh, you know what? I think I'm holding this the wrong way. There we are. That's better. That makes sense. Okay, so the shoulder tip at the neck should be matching up. Okay. I'm gonna grab my ruler. Now you can see underneath my paper, there's that tip. Looks like I'm just a little shy of 2 inches. I'm gonna pull it a little bit more. Try it again. Oh wow, that's exactly 2 inches. Great. And now it wants me to trace the neckline and part of the center lines. So here's our center back line. Trace that. Oh no, my paper's not on my center front. I'm gonna have to move my paper. Okay, I'm gonna use my ruler to help me trace my center front. Okay. And then it wants me to trace the neckline as well. And it says a point will appear at the shoulder neckline. And yep, there is my point. So that's figure 1. Figure 2 says to extend the center back neck 1/8 of an inch. So half scale is only 1/16 of an inch. Okay. So I'm just extending it so it's a little bit longer. 1/16 of an inch. Okay, and then it says draw the neckline through the point ending 1/4 inch below center front. So here is center front. Why don't I go ahead and mark 1/4 inch? So I know to end. Oh, again, we're on half scale. Half of 1/4 is actually 1/8. There we are. There's 1/8. Okay. And okay, so I'm basically blending my neckline to get rid of the point, but they want me to put a notch right here as well, so I don't forget about that. Okay, so I'm gonna get a French ruler to help me with this. Okay, so now this goes away. This guy goes away. Then we're drawing a style collar paralleled with our neckline. So if I'd like to use this guy, I can. So I just drew this and they want it kind of parallel. I guess it doesn't really matter how wide. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, mark a notch at the shoulder, which I did already, and cut from the paper and true it to the neckline of the garment. So, do we remember what truing up means? If we're gonna true this collar up, to this neckline, that means really it has to be the same length. Okay, so I'm gonna get measuring tape. I'm gonna measure both of them, and let's see if we're right on or if we're off a little. Fudge it at all. Okay, no, okay, maybe it's right there. Okay, I think it's the lower one. So we'll say 3/8. This is 4 3/8 is the length. Now let's measure our collar. Oh, it's 4 1/2. Okay, so I'm gonna change this one to also be 4 1/2. And you know, I think the easiest way is maybe extend it out on the back a bit. So let's see if that works. I'm gonna start at 4 1/2 and kind of work my way backwards. That actually did it. Okay, so I'm going to cut this out. They are trued up, and that is the end of figure 2. Okay, figure 3, they want us to trace our collar on the fold of paper. So I got another piece of paper, just folding in half. You can use pattern paper. Today, of course, I am working from home and I don't know where my pattern paper is. So I'm just using computer paper, which will be fine. Okay, so here's my collar that I cut out. I'm putting it on the fold and I'm gonna trace it as per figure 3. Okay, they want me to mark my center back notches. So I guess I should probably unfold it to do that. They're also marking the notch across from our original notch. I'm just trying to kind of line it up. It's kind of weird. Whatever. Oh, here we are. Okay, figure 4 is, oh, they want me to cut this from paper. Okay, so what this is going to be our collar. So I'm actually gonna just go ahead, I'm gonna add my green line, which is gonna be right here towards the center on the fold. And I'm gonna call this my collar. And I'll say cut 1. You know, the date, the pattern maker's name, notebook sample, all the other stuff as well. So I'm gonna cut this guy out. Okay, that's the end of figure 3. So figure 4, now we're going to draft the under collar. So we're going to trace this collar on the fold again. So I still have some leftover paper here. Let's see if it'll fit. Yes, it does. Okay. Might as well just mark my grain line and just write under collar, cut 1. Now we're gonna trim it a 1/4 inch, and I'm not gonna have you half scale that. We're gonna just leave it at 1/8 inch. And so we're just trimming this bottom part and then around this corner, 1/8 inch. We're leaving this neckline because we wanna sew this neckline to the neckline of our bodice, and we trued it up already, so we know that this was 4.5, so this has to stay. I believe it was 4.5. So we don't want to trim that because then that means we won't be able to sew it to our neck. We're just trimming the bottom part. And think about why. Why are we doing that? I'll tell you in a minute, but I don't know. What if I didn't tell you? Could you figure out why? Okay, so oops, let me get my notches moved in. So we're trimming all of that off. This is going in the trash. Okay. So basically, when we sew these together, we're going to sew it around the neck of this. You'll have to cut out both the front and back bodice, 2 of the front, and then 1 of the back on the fold. And then when you sew the collar, it's all going to get sewn around the neck, but you can see the collar's a little longer than the under collar. When that gets sewn together, it's going to pull the collar this way so that when the wearer is wearing the collar, you won't see the seam line of this sewn together. The seam will be kind of rolled under, is why. You'll probably be able to see it better once it's sewn up. So just to finish this, we still should finish labeling. Because of the collar, we're gonna have to open the garment in the front, so we will not cut our center front bodice on the fold. So this can still be front bodice, half size is fine, and we'll say cut 2. This guy though, he should be cut on the fold, so we'll say cut 1 on fold. So I wanted to do a quick video about sewing up the Peter Pan collar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the underlining collar to the collar. And I'm not going to sew it together around the neck. I'm only going to sew it together around this little curved part here, and then this bottom part of the collar and the curved part. And then once it's sewn together, I'm going to sew this seam right here to the neckline of the bodice. And then I can either hand stitch to get rid of the seam allowance for the underlining or do stitch in the ditch. So before I do that, I do need to sew up my darts, and I need to get my shoulders sewn together before doing the collar. So those are my steps, and yeah, let's see how it turns out. Okay, so I sewed my underlining collar to my collar. And a little tip around the corners is it's best if you can use a teenier stitch, and that'll help you kind of get a clip curve. I will tell you, my actual collar was a little bit longer on both sides, and there was no way I was going to be able to get this seam to match it because this bottom one had to be the same length. So I just sewed the bottom one at the same length, and then I just sewed the side seam of my underlining collar, so you can see my actual collar. The actual sew line was out a little bit. I just wasn't able to do that, so I just cut it shorter. I really feel like, I guess, to do the roll collar, you really can only shorten it at the bottom, not the sides. So I'm gonna double check the book to make sure they told us to reduce it on the side as well. But anyways, now I need to flip it, and you know, sometimes just clipping the seam allowance around the curves can help the fabric just spread a little bit better once you turn it inside out. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that around these curves. I just go right up to the stitch line. Yeah, okay. Of course, pressing it will also be helpful. So I'm gonna take it to the iron and flip it out, and I'll bring it back to show you what it looks like. Okay, so I just turned my collar. Here's the underlining. I'm gonna zoom in. So because my underlining was slightly smaller, it makes my seam kind of roll a little bit. So when the person's wearing it, the goal is like, see how here you can see the seam? That's yucky, we don't like that. We really want it to roll to go on the underside, and by having your pattern just shaved a little bit smaller, kind of forces it, the underlining, to be smaller, and it kind of pulls the actual collar to roll over to the inside. So that's what you're trying to do. But yeah, so it looks like, let me zoom out. Now I'm ready to go ahead and sew this onto my bodice. So let me pull it up real quick. So it's gonna go around like this. Okay, cool. So, okay, like kind of forgetting, getting turned around. Yeah, it goes like this. Okay, so here, what I'm gonna do, so my seam allowance is actually right here. So I should probably go and finish this edge real quick. And then I'll line this up right here. And I'm gonna sew on this sew line all the way around, but I'm not sewing this part, the underlining. I'm just sewing the collar to the shirt all the way around. And then I'll deal with the raw edge of the underlining after I sew the collar to the shirt. Okay, so I sewed on the underlining part of my collar to the shirt, and I still have my collar here. So now to finish it off, I'm gonna push up all my seam allowance, and I fold under my raw edge, my seam allowance on the collar, and I just kind of cover that stitch. And I could go ahead and put in my pins. I can do a hand stitch if I want, or I can do a thing called stitch in the ditch, where I try to sew exactly on this seam that's already been sewn together. And as long as my garment passes this little stitch line, it'll get caught. If it's too far past, then the seam allowance kind of pops out, or if it's not up right next to it, then when you stitch in the ditch, you won't catch it. So, so yes, a lot of people like to just hand stitch it, kind of slip the needle through, catch a little bit of the garment, slip it through the fold, catch the garment. But you really want all that seam allowance tucked under and hidden, and then you will be done, and you can check out your little Peter Pan collar design.